My name is Sophie, 37 years old. I used to serve in the military and now I work for the Federal Emergency Relief Agency. That morning, under the scorching Arizona sun, a police officer forced me to kneel on the blistering pavement, just because I was wearing my father's worn-out jacket. My father, a former Army colonel, vanished under mysterious circumstances 10 years ago. Then he pulled a gun, pointed it straight at my face, and pulled the trigger. I collapsed, blood soaking into the fabric. Someone screamed. A phone clattered to the ground. But in that instant, I knew that shot wasn't about the jacket. It was about a secret they had killed my father to keep buried. Have you ever felt invisible just because you carried the memory of someone you loved? If you've ever been silenced against your will, leave a comment. Tap like if you believe some things are worth surviving for. And subscribe because the story I'm about to tell has only just begun. I don't remember the exact day he disappeared. But I remember that moment, when I opened the door to my father's study and saw his familiar leather briefcase lying silent on the desk, a thing that had never once left his hand during any mission. I was 27 then, still serving, stationed at El Paso. My father, Colonel Walter Dean, wasn't the kind of man who just vanished. He was the kind of man who, when he walked into a room, no one dared sit straighter than him. He didn't have to shout, he only had to look. I'd seen his superiors hold their breath when he went quiet. But at home he made the best hot chocolate I've ever had. He once told me something I've never forgotten, something I didn't truly understand until years later. People can live with all kinds of uncertainty, but only the truth can feed the soul. The last project my father worked on was codenamed Ashfall, a name that never appeared in any public military database. I know because I searched everywhere. I turned every page in the places I was allowed. And I found ways to reach the ones I wasn't. I asked his old colleagues. They looked at me like I was digging up a grave no one dared open. One of his former teammates, Uncle Tom Riley, came to our house that winter. I made tea, invited him in, and asked just one question. What was Ashfall? He set the cup down untouched, looked me in the eye, and walked out the door. Not a single word. My mother died when I was 19. A car accident on her way home after a night shift at the hospital. My father never drove at night again after that. As for my younger brother, Kevin, he was 4 years behind me, and after our mom died, he slowly slipped out of our father's reach. Kevin chose drugs over the military. Chose street corner friends over our father's guidance. I don't blame him. I just feel a deep sadness that even now I still don't understand what Kevin saw in our father's eyes that made him turn away like that. I chose the opposite path. I went to West Point. Graduated as a second lieutenant. I had once hoped to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father on the same battlefield. But he never talked much about his work. Only once, on a rainy night, did he call me out to the porch, hand me his coat, the one I've kept like a sacred object ever since, and say, "If one day I don't come home, keep this. Not to remember me, but to remind yourself who you are." Back then I didn't understand. What could a coat possibly do? But today, as my blood seeped into every worn stitch, I understood. It wasn't just memory. It was also code. I've knocked on countless doors searching for the truth about my father, about Ashfall, and not once has anyone looked me in the eye and said, yes. At Fort Bragg, I was denied access to restricted records, even with my security clearance. At Langley, an old officer asked, "You really want to know?" When I nodded, he just shrugged. "Then it's probably best you don't." I had lost faith for a time. I even believed maybe he'd done something wrong. Something so unforgivable they had to erase him from military maps. But I know my father. I know the way he held my mother each night, the way his voice cracked reading letters from the front, the way he looked at me when I earned my first medal. A man like that isn't a traitor. I've lived quietly since then. Left the service. Took a job with FEMA, staying behind the scenes, handling disaster relief. Saving lives quietly. No one knew I was Walter Dean's daughter. No one knew I wore a uniform once. No one asked. I never said. I hid that coat carefully. Never wore it, except on the day I marked as my father's death anniversary. A date I made up since no one ever confirmed when he died. Until this morning. The morning I wore it was the morning I got shot. And now I have no doubt. Ashfall isn't dead. It just moved. And the shadow my father left behind, they still fear it. They didn't shoot me because of me. They shot me because of the name stitched on the chest. Walter Dean. Because I'm still alive. And because some people Don't want me to speak that name again. When I woke up, the overhead light wasn't the kind from a small-town hospital. There were no nurses calling out, no heart monitor beeping rhythmically. Just a cold yellow glow from a crooked ceiling bulb, and the sharp scent of cheap disinfectant like someone had just wiped blood off the floor. I tried to sit up, but it felt like a sandbag was crushing my chest. Pain shot up from my right side, where the bullet had hit, making me gasp. I looked around. The room was small, windowless, with an M4 in my left arm and a small camera mounted in the corner. No doctor's name, no medical charts, no footsteps. It was too quiet. Too clean. Too intentional. I knew instantly, this wasn't a hospital. This was where they took people no one was supposed to remember. A moment later, the door creaked open. A man walked in, salt and pepper hair, sun-weathered skin, light blue shirt without a tie. No name tag. But his eyes made every muscle in me tighten on instinct. He said, "No, are you awake? No, are you in pain?" I nodded slightly, keeping my eyes on his hands. "My name is Jonas Thorne," he said calmly. "I served with your father. Walter Dean." The way that name came out of his mouth felt strange. Not warm. Not respectful. Just a name buried with a classified file. "I need to know where I am," I said, my voice hoarse. Jonas stepped forward, pulled a metal chair beside the bed. "A preventative medical facility. Not on any map. Not under FEMA. Not under the military." He paused. "And your name doesn't exist in the system." I took a deep breath, mind racing for who could have brought me here. Why am I still alive? He didn't answer right away. He pulled a file from his pocket. Worn, spine frayed, pages yellowing. He set it on the bedside table, angled so I could see the faded red letters on the cover. Project Ashfall, classified. I leaned forward, forgetting the pain. "That. Nearly a complete copy," he said. "I couldn't keep the last page." I shot him a look. "Nearly." The final page listed the names of those who were erased. The air thickened. I reached for the pages. Maps, biological specs, damage reports, trial codes. All matched the things my father once whispered when he thought I'd fallen asleep on the sofa. I swallowed hard. "How did you get this?" Jonas leaned back in the chair. "Because I was one of the 5 people ordered to destroy the entire project and eliminate the original command team." I jumped to my feet as if I could lunge across and strangle him, even though my body at that point was little more than skin and bones, and the bullet wound hadn't fully closed. "You killed my father?" I roared, my voice cracking more from pain than rage. Jonas remained calm. "No. Thought I did. But when we brought down the testing facility in northern Syria, Walter had disappeared the day before. No body was ever found." I gripped the edge of the bed, my breath slamming against my chest. "I thought you were my father's friend. We were brothers in arms. Until he discovered Project Ashfall wasn't about survival anymore. It was a front for strategic exploitation and the erasure of local populations." Jonas lowered his head. "He resisted. And they labeled him a traitor." I looked at him, torn. "Then why give me all this now?" Jonas was silent. Then he pulled a small photo from his wallet. A young man in uniform standing beside my father. They were laughing. The wind was whipping their overshirts around their body armor. "I owe him," Jonas said. "One time in Fallujah. If he hadn't dragged me out of that crater, I wouldn't be alive today to realize I committed the worst mistake of my life." I clutched the photo, eyes stinging. Jonas stood up. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just hoping you live long enough to know the truth. Your father might still be alive." I looked up, unsure what he meant. "The final page," Jonas said, turning toward the door. "It's not missing. It was hidden. And the person holding it is the one who shot you." I left the facility as soon as Jonas was out of sight. No doctors, no discharge papers. Just a door that opened to a vacant lot and a small truck waiting under the fading evening light. I drove home in silence, my hand trembling slightly on the wheel, my father's coat slung over the back of the seat like a shadow I couldn't shake. The house I rented sat on the south side of Tucson, near an old gas station and a mechanic shop owned by a Mexican man named Javier. I'd lived there for over 3 years, and not once had anyone asked me where I came from or who once claimed me as family. And I had never told anyone I had a younger brother. Kevin. I used to think if there was anything that truly broke my father's heart, it wasn't the wounds from war. It was the look in Kevin's eyes when he walked out of the house at 16, wearing shoes with worn-down soles and saying, "I don't need anyone to lead me." He used to have the loudest laugh in the house. But after our mother died, he fell silent, slipping into something I couldn't pull him out of: drugs, gangs, then vanished off the radar of every social service agency. We still texted now and then, short, cold messages, sometimes no reply at all. I sent money when he needed it. He never asked for much. There was one night last year he showed up at my house around 3 in the morning, eyes bloodshot, his nose still bleeding. I didn't ask anything. I just opened the door, made tea, and let him crash on the couch. I figured he was still my brother. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew something was wrong. The back door latch was broken. The coffee table was messy, but not in the way a professional thief would leave it. Everything looked like someone familiar had been inside, not to steal but to find one specific thing. I went straight to the study. The hidden drawer where I kept letters my father sent from combat zones had been pulled open. A single note lay on the desk, hastily folded, the ink smudged from dampness. "Sophie, be careful." I didn't know what they were after until it was too late. You're reading this, I guess. I didn't get the chance to say I'm sorry. My whole body went cold. I opened my phone and dialed Kevin's number. The automated voice replied evenly, "The number you are calling is currently unavailable." I called again and again, until my throat was dry as gravel. I drove to the rundown motel at the end of the street, where I knew he'd stayed a few nights recently. The man at the corner store just pointed toward a police cruiser parked outside one of the last rooms. "Some kid died of an overdose," he said without looking at me. You probably knew him. Black hair. Falcon tattoo on his left wrist. I didn't hear the rest of what he said. I stepped forward, past the caution tape where a forensic tech was signing a clipboard. I didn't need to see the body. I only needed to see the rubber bracelet Kevin always wore sticking out from under the white sheet. I staggered back. A young cop came up, gently guiding me outside, his voice politely distant. "We found a quantity of fentanyl near the body. Seems like an overdose." I nodded but said nothing. Not because I believed him, but because I already knew. Kevin would never inject himself. He hated needles. He once cried for a whole hour just over a flu shot when he was 8. I knew who did it. No one had to say it. No evidence needed. Boone. I returned to my truck, blasted the AC and sat still. My head dropped onto the steering wheel, the smell of my father's jacket still lingering on the collar like a desperate embrace. I wanted to scream but no sound came out. I didn't have time to cry. No time to mourn or lay flowers on a stone. Kevin was gone, but this time, they weren't going to take my life along with his. I was the last person left bearing the Dean name. And I swore, none of them would sleep through the morning. I sat up all night at the kitchen table, lit only by the yellow glow of a rusted iron lampshade and the slow tick of a clock that sounded like the breath of someone on life support. Beside me was the file Jonas had handed me, tied with a thin piece of twine so old that when I untied it, dust stung my nose like smoke. Each page was a layer of dust over memory. Each code, each black and white photo sliced deeper into my chest. I thought I was ready for the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to read. Project A wasn't just some biological test program. It was a classified military project launched in the late 1990s, described as a strategic response to chemical warfare in the 21st century. In the beginning, Ashfall sounded reasonable. To develop soldiers who could withstand toxins, radiation, and survive extreme conditions. At that point I thought, my father must have been proud of this. But then came Phase 2, marked in bold red ink. Civilian application, Tier 3. I flipped quickly through the next pages. Satellite photos of impoverished regions near rare earth mines, mainly in the Middle East, parts of Africa, and especially Native American territories right here in the US. Places where the government had once promised never to extract resources by force. The next page made my hand go cold. A handwritten entry from my father. Clear out Zone C27 before the Canadian survey team arrives. Assign the task to my unit. I refuse. If anyone is reading this, let me be clear. I do not serve private interests disguised under a national flag. WD. I recognized that handwriting instantly. The ink had bled, maybe from rain or after a rushed evacuation. That last line read like a dying confession meant for no one's ears. I paused, placing a hand gently on the jacket my father used to wear, now draped over the back of a chair. In my mind, I could still see him standing in the yard on a summer afternoon when I was 10, teaching me how to use a compass. Just remember one thing, he said. The straightest path to the truth is usually the most painful. I took a deep breath, then turned the next page. There was a name that had haunted my nightmares: Travis Boone. A section of the internal report was stamped for security auditing, verified wire transfer, $250,000 from Shell Company Black Granite Limited to an anonymous account under the name TB, 3 weeks prior to Operation Duskfall. Operation Duskfall, when I looked it up, was the code name for the irregular suppression campaign on the outskirts of Raqqa. A mission my father had joined, and where he vanished. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might rip through my ribs. Boone had taken the money. Boone wasn't just a pawn. He was the trigger. I clutched the file, hands trembling, every line of ink now searing hot in my eyes. This wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't a maybe. Boone had taken a bribe to kill my father. And his entire unit. Suddenly, a mini tape fell out from between the pages. An old magnetic cassette, the kind barely used since the early 2000s. I shot up and dug through my storage until I found the dusty tape recorder I'd kept from my deployment days. I popped the cassette in. The speaker crackled a bit, then a man's voice came through, gravelly but steady. My father's voice. Boone isn't just some cop. He's the gateway between the military and the private sector. He clears the path for extraction companies by turning civilians into statistics. They want to use ashfall to wipe out impoverished regions, then blame it on environmental disasters or internal conflict. I refused to sign the order. No. I'm a traitor in their eyes. I bit down hard on my lip until it bled. My father wasn't just erased. He was buried under cash, fake headlines, and perfectly staged nightly news segments. And Boone, he still wore the badge, still flashed that polished uniform, still dined in town like a so-called guardian of law and order. I shut the recorder, glancing around the quiet house. Kevin's old cigarette smell still lingered faintly in the corners. And it hit me, I was the last one left to tell the truth. My father once saved an entire city from being wiped out by a nerve agent. But they turned him into a villain, then sent someone like Boone to paint his hands with blood. Well, now they'd learn. That blood never fades. And me, I'd make sure every last drop showed under the daylight. I laid out my father's worn jacket on the table, carefully as if unfolding a suicide note. For the first time I noticed something off about the lining, thicker than usual. Not for warmth. For concealment. Using a small blade, I sliced along the stitching, my fingers trembling as I peeled back the dusty threads until I felt a sliver of cold metal no wider than my pinky. Alongside it, something wrapped tight in black tape, barely 2 knuckles long. A voice recorder. I inserted the chip into my laptop, which was disconnected from the internet and running local-only software. The screen blinked to life. w.final. I clicked play. My father's voice came through, hoarse but unwavering. If you found this, things are already out of hand. Ashfall was never about survival. It was a test. A test to see how much human beings can endure before they collapse. And the ones behind it, they're not just a few generals. It's an entire system that profits from the silence of men like me. I sat frozen. It wasn't just the truth about my father. It was the truth about this country. About forgotten places. About how evil hides behind the word security and erases life in the name of peace. My father didn't choose survival by submission. He chose to vanish so the ones left behind could know the truth about the lie they lived in. I looked down at the jacket. It wasn't a keepsake. It was evidence. A final testament from a man who kept his oath to protect the country, even after the country turned its back. I grabbed my phone and searched for the one number I saved under a name I dared to trust. Mallory Price. She was a former war reporter. Fired for exposing military corruption. Nearly killed in an explosion she believes was set up by a so-called ally. Now she lived quietly in a Denver apartment, writing for an independent paper most people dismissed as conspiracy theory. But I knew Mallory didn't chase conspiracies. He chased the truth. The line rang 3 times before she answered. Sophie Dean. Her voice was low and rasped like cigarette smoke and old tape. I need your help. I have everything. Ashfall. Walter Dean's recordings. The wire transfers. Boone. A long silence stretched across the call. Then she said, send everything to the old encrypted email. I'll handle the rest. But if you really have what you say you do, Boone won't be the only one coming. I uploaded the full archive. The audio, the transaction logs, the photos of the chip. An hour later she replied, I believe you. And they'll hate me for that. I collapsed against the table for a few minutes, then stood up and opened the medicine cabinet. I found the morphine bottle left from my trauma unit days and shook it gently, just enough left for a few doses. I wasn't planning to end my life. But I needed a way to disappear. Boone thought I was dead. That was the first card I held. I placed a call through an old veteran services channel and filed a fake transfer order for a severely unstable psychiatric patient to a rehab facility in inner-city Chicago, one of those off-grid sites I'd briefly worked at. Places that didn't report to any federal system if the money was right. I forged the medical records. Severe PTSD. Paranoia. Delusional system distrust. I sent the request using the email of a doctor who died 2 years ago but whose login credentials were never fully removed from the local intranet. Then I recorded a video, me looking disheveled, eyes bloodshot, muttering about the figures on the ceiling and someone watching through the pipes. I added a fast heartbeat track, paired with an old CT scan file. I sent that video directly to Boone's phone. Half an hour later I got an anonymous call. I didn't answer. I knew he had seen it. Boone believed I had gone insane, that I was just another burden to forget. And that was the sweetest trap I ever laid. I put my father's coat back on, quietly resuing the inner lining after slipping in a new chip. One that recorded Boone's entire call and the location of every transaction. Boone thought he had won. But I was alive and I was rewriting the story he thought he'd burned for good. The meeting was set with a single text message, sent from one of Mallory's encrypted contacts. Saturday, 9 p.m. Warehouse 4, Black Ridge Desert, Nevada. Someone he owed a life wants to see you. No signature. No warning. I drove 7 hours from Tucson, across desolate highways where streetlights were a luxury and desert winds scraped dust against my windshield like whispers from nameless bones. Warehouse 4 appeared as a shapeless shadow in the mute wasteland. Dim lights, gate already open, no cars, no guards. Just the smell of machine oil and rusted steel, and the undeniable sense that I was stepping into a place where law had long since died. The man standing in the center of the warehouse was a solid presence. His dark suit couldn't hide the posture of someone who once commanded thousands. Now only his aging frame remained, masked by lethal calm. He turned as I stepped in, the sodium light casting a cold gleam across his smoke-gray eyes like tempered steel. You're Sophie Dean, he said. It wasn't a question. You're Vernon Slade, I replied, also not needing confirmation. A nod. He held out his hand and I didn't take it. Why am I here? I asked, my voice drier than the desert beneath us. He smiled, a cold, granite smile. Because you're still alive. And Walter isn't dead. The air froze. It felt like I'd just been punched in the chest by something nameless. I stepped back, then stood still. What are you talking about? He didn't die. 11 years ago, we were ordered to dismantle the Ashfall unit after Walter refused to hand over the second-gen genetic designs. Problem was, Slade shrugged. He vanished 2 days before the operation. Alone. No one knew how. I swallowed hard, my hand tightening on the hem of the coat. Then who did you execute in Raqqa? 3 people, Slade answered without flinching. 2 medics and 1 engineer. As for Walter, we found him a month later severely injured hiding near the Alaskan border. But he never let go of the gene sequence inside him. That's what made him dangerous. Dangerous. My voice cut out like torn paper. He was the only one who refused to turn soldiers into killing tools. The last man with a conscience in a system rotted to its core. Slade didn't react. Which is exactly why we didn't kill him. We locked him away. Where? I asked, each word like carving through concrete. Slade stared at me for a long moment, then moved to the steel table at the center. He opened a satellite map, laid it out, and pointed to the far northern edge of Alaska, right on the border of an unnamed white zone. Phoenix Facility. One of the Omega-grade biocenters. No one goes in. No one comes out. I stared at the red mark he circled. Why tell me? He sighed, his eyes looked almost human. Because I'm dying. Liver. For months, maybe less. And because I owe Walter more than anyone else who's ever worn this uniform. I said nothing. I couldn't forgive him. But I needed to know. Slade leaned over and pulled a small bundle wrapped in canvas from a drawer. When he opened it, I saw a cracked military ID tag with the name Walter D. Dean and a faded red stamp. Restricted, classified. You won't find him through any official channel. Not even the Department of Defense knows he's alive, Slade said slowly. We kept him because we couldn't let him die. Walter carries the first experimental bloodline, resistant to toxins, capable of tissue regeneration. A mistake he chose to bear. I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. My eyes were burning like fire. Does anyone else know? I asked, my voice so low I barely recognized it. Boone knows, Slade said. And this time he wants Walter dead for real. But if you get to Phoenix before he does, you might still have a chance. I slipped the ID tag into the inner pocket of my coat, buttoned it tight like sealing a part of my heart inside. Vernon Slade looked at me with no pleading, no guilt, just the quiet admission of a man who reached the end of his life still owing someone the truth. Want me to wish you luck? He asked. I shook my head. I don't need luck, I said. I need my father home. Our flight touched down in Fairbanks at 3 a.m., as northern winds whipped across rows of prefab buildings like iron whips. The Alaskan sky was pitch black, no moon, no stars, only the crunch of snow beneath the tires of the military truck Mallory had rented, silently pulling off the main road and cutting through sparse forest toward the coordinates Vernon Slade had marked. I sat in the back seat, clutching my father's military ID inside my coat pocket. Beside me, Mallory's eyes never left the map. Across from us were 3 soldiers who had once served under Walter Dean, the man they still called Commander Red. Eli Bennett, in his 50s, his left arm replaced by a mechanical prosthetic after a blast in Kandahar. Simone Reyes, Special Reconnaissance, silent nearly the entire trip. And Jonah Hale, the only one who'd ever escaped Phoenix after a failed training exercise 10 years ago, an exercise he called the slaughter beneath the ice. We're here, Mallory said quietly, cutting the headlights. Ahead of us was an abandoned observation post. No name, no signs, only 2 snapped antenna towers and a snow-covered hatch. But the satellite chip sewn into my father's coat showed clearly. This was the side entrance to the Phoenix facility. An old utility tunnel once used to transport bioequipment. Jonah led, using an electromagnetic code to unlock the hidden latch. A soft click echoed. The steel door slid open, revealing a steep stairwell and air thick with chlorine and rust. We put on gas masks, synced our timers, and began to descend. The tunnel was dark and freezing. Our breaths crystallized behind the filters. Simone silently lit LED markers along the wall. I felt each step sink into the thin ice layered over concrete like I was walking through time, year by year, lie by lie, piled since the moment Ashfall was born. Jonah pointed toward a junction. Left leads to the machine room. But if we want to reach the central biocore, we have to go lower. Eli frowned. So we're cutting through the gas processing chamber? Jonah nodded. And we've got to move fast. After 10 minutes, the cooling system auto-reactivates. We split into 2 teams. I, Mallory, and Jonah went to the lower level. Simone and Eli stayed to secure the tech lock. The plan was simple. Find my father, recover any remaining genetic data, and escape through the waste tier tunnel. But everything started going wrong at minute 9. A soft explosion came from behind. The radio went silent. Emergency lights flashed red. The biometric scanner system began sweeping the basement, something Jonah said should have been disabled over a decade ago. Mallory shouted into the mic, "Simone, Eli, report." Silence. Then a male voice, choked and panicked. Simone was, they, gunfire rang out. Then complete stillness. I tightened the strap on my backpack, heart pounding in my ears. Jonah turned to look at me, his eyes gone dark. They still have a security team, he said through clenched teeth. And Simone wasn't betrayed from the outside. It was from within. We ran down the corridor, thick with cold steam. The walls began to change, from gray concrete to polished white and sterile metal. The disinfectant smell was so strong I had to hold my breath. The main biology lab door came into view, dual layers of armored glass and a 6-level code lock. But when I scanned my father's ID card, the green light came on instantly. We stepped inside and I nearly collapsed. In the middle of the freezing room, inside a semi-glass containment pod, lay a gaunt man, skin tinged yellow, hair stark white like frozen snow. His eyes were cloudy, barely responsive. Tubes, electrodes, and unfamiliar biometric tags were attached all over his body. I walked toward him slowly. His eyes shifted. And when they landed on me very faintly, his lips moved. "Sophie, baby." I broke down in tears. Every word, every plan, every ounce of anger shattered inside me like broken glass. It's me. I'm here to bring you home." But he shook his head. A weak but resolute shake. "No. Can't come home anymore. Body, unstable. They tested on me, something you can't take with you." I held his hand tightly. His eyes filled with tears. "But the truth, Sophie. Take it, bring it to the light. Don't let me be a nameless victim." I nodded, biting my lip hard enough to draw blood. I couldn't let him die here. But I knew, if my father left this place, the world would see him as something less than human. We extracted the remaining data. Mallory downloaded all genetic samples and experiment logs. Jonah moved to detach the tubes, but Dad stopped him with a single silent look. My father was still alive. But the price of that survival was a part of his soul already taken from him. And now I had to bring back what was left. Not just for me, but for a nation still asleep under promises never kept. I sat in front of the camera lens, studio lights glaring against my skin, hot and blinding, stripping away every sensation until all that remained was the echo of silence in my chest. Mallory adjusted the mic, gave me a small nod from behind the camera. "We're live," she whispered. It was the first live broadcast I had ever done. No polished backdrop, no media team, no legal advisor standing by. Just me, a small basement room in an abandoned building in Chicago, and a truth too massive to stay hidden. I began speaking slowly, every word carved out from within me. "My name is Sophie Dean. I'm a former emergency response coordinator for FEMA, a former armed forces officer, and the daughter of Walter Dean, who was declared missing after an overseas mission in 2013. I paused. "My father is not dead. He's been held in a top-secret biological facility in Alaska, where his body has been used as a test subject to protect this government's darkest secrets." I laid everything out. No embellishment. No detours. I explained Ashfall, the project to turn humans into bioweapons for clearing poor communities before handing over land to extraction corporations. I revealed proof of the payments made to Boone, the man tasked with eliminating non-compliant members. I played my father's final recording. His image, pale inside the containment pod, eyes still holding the last flicker of a soldier who never left his post. Mallory handled the rest. She streamed the broadcast across 3 independent news networks and dozens of social platforms. Within 15 minutes, it had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Comments poured in, outrage, grief, horror. An hour later, the mainstream media could no longer stay silent. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News had to cover the story. Ashfall exposed, a black ops program accused of human rights violations. The next day, protests spread from Chicago down to Washington, D.C., up through Seattle, and even reached decommissioned military bases. That afternoon, footage from a security camera in Tucson City Hall showed Boone being cuffed by federal agents and dragged from his office, face pale as ash. As the camera panned in, he screamed, "I was just following orders. You don't know what you're messing with." For a moment I thought it might be over. I was too naive. That night, as I was packing up gear at our temporary base, Mallory's phone rang. Her face went pale. She said nothing, just turned the screen toward me. A message from an unknown number, just one line. "You chose the light. Now we'll bring you back to the dark." Below it was a photo, Nora, my daughter, standing outside her school gate. A man in a security jacket holding her hand. But Nora's eyes, those terrified eyes, knew the man wasn't the one cleared to pick her up. I couldn't breathe. It felt like something was pulling me under from the inside. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. Nora, they've got her, I whispered, my whole body going cold. Mallory gripped my shoulder. We'll get her back. Trust me. They left a trail. I nodded, but my hand holding the phone wouldn't stop shaking. Memories flooded in. Nora at age 3 running around the backyard, ponytails uneven. Nora at 5 sleeping through the night without a bedtime story. Her voice yesterday on the phone. Mom, can we go to the park this weekend? I want to wear Grandpa's coat. I promised. And now she was out there, in the hands of the same people who made my father disappear like he never existed. I once thought losing my dad was the cruelest thing I'd ever lived through. But now losing Nora might be the only thing that could make me stop wanting to survive. This wasn't a soldier's story anymore. Or a whistleblower's. Now I was a mother. And I would walk straight into hell to bring my daughter back. I crossed the chestnut grove before sunrise, the pain in my left shoulder growing numb, blood streaming from the wound where shrapnel had torn near the collarbone. In my hand was an old Glock 19 and in my heart, Nora's face. Dirt smudged but still burning with that spark as I whispered to her through the final video she received. Mom's coming. I won't leave you behind. The mansion stood isolated on the frozen land of northern Wyoming, its back pressed against a hillside, forest in the front and barren land behind. Vernon Slade had chosen this place as his final fortress, the kind of place he believed no one would dare approach. But I didn't come here with courage. I came with the instinct of a mother, a daughter, and a woman who was done bowing her head. The main gate was unlocked. The porch lights still on. A man with a rifle stood watch on the second-floor balcony, his eyes still heavy with sleep. I crept along the worn path, matching the rhythm of the flattened grass so as not to make a sound. When I reached the left side maintenance hatch, I slipped inside. The smell of metal mixed with dampness filled my nose. The air was thick with old paint and human sweat. I listened closely. A faint chuckle. The voice of an older man, gentle, almost calm. She's a clever girl. She asked me if I'm a bad person. I didn't answer. The truth keeps children awake at night, Sophie. I stepped out of the shadows. Inside the room, Slade sat behind a large oak desk, a glass of expensive whiskey in hand. Behind him was Nora, tied to a chair, duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide and terrified. Put the drink down, I said, my voice hoarse from cold and dried blood in my throat. Slade didn't look surprised. So you made it. I guess Boone couldn't keep his mouth shut. Boone's dead. I raised my gun. And you're next. Slade set the glass down and rose slowly. You don't have to do this. Walter being alive was a mistake. He knew it. So do you. My father chose to sacrifice himself to keep the last shred of his humanity. You chose to kill him slowly like an experiment. We're not the same. He stepped closer, hands raised as if offering mercy. You think justice comes from a bullet? No, Sophie. Justice is what gets written down in records. And those records, I've already rewritten. I haven't. I pulled the trigger. The bullet drove straight into his right shoulder. He fell back, crashing against the desk, letting out a howl of pain. I rushed forward and cut Nora's bindings. She burst into tears and clung to me. You're okay. I'm here. I've got you now. Slade crawled across the floor, blood soaking through his shirt. He reached for a gun hidden in the drawer. But just then the large glass doors shattered open. 4 federal agents stormed in, weapons drawn, their voices echoing through the room. Drop the weapon. Vernon Slade, you are under arrest for treason, kidnapping, and abuse of authority. Slade raised his hands, his eyes locked on mine. I won't be in prison long. You know how this game works better than anyone. I lifted Nora and turned away without a word. The game's over, Vernon. It's my board now. 3 weeks later, I stood quietly before a crisp white headstone lined in formation with hundreds of others at Arlington National Cemetery. My father was buried among those he once led, among brothers in arms who believed he had been gone for years. I wore his old jacket, the inner lining now empty of any chips or data. Only a new patch I had sewn in myself, stitched in black thread. No silence. No surrender. Nora stood beside me, her hand in mine. She wore a red coat, her hair neatly tied back, her expression solemn, as if she understood more than her 9 years should allow. I knelt down, slipped the coat from my shoulders, folded it neatly, and placed it on the headstone engraved with the name Walter D. Dean. I brushed my fingers over the gold lettering and felt that the hollow space inside me had finally quieted. I whispered, not for anyone else to hear, just softly enough for the wind to carry away. Your daughter is still standing. What do you think about what happened to my father, to me, and to a system that was supposed to protect us? If it were you, would you stand up when everything around you demanded silence? Have you ever carried a truth so heavy no one believed it, yet you still couldn't let it go? I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because some truths need to be lit, if only by a single match in the dark. There are still fathers like Walter Dean being forgotten. There are still children like Nora who need to know that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about taking that next step, even while your heart trembles. If this story made you think, if it touched something inside you, leave a comment. I want to hear your voice. Because sometimes one voice can pull someone back from the edge. And if you still believe the truth has a place in this world, don't forget to follow this channel, as I will be back with more stories about family, about loss, about trust, and about how we learn to rise again.